Dive Podcast, straight talk on politics, national security, and America's future. With Robert Johnson and Linda Miller, we cut through the spin, tackle the tough issues, and give you the real story behind today's headlines. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to stay informed. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at those recent talks in Istanbul between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah, the first real high-level meeting since, 2022? Big news.
Exactly. And we've gathered reports from various Western media outlets to try and piece together, what actually happened.
What the different takes are on the outcome.
Right. So our mission here is to really dive into these reports, get past the headlines, and understand the key points, the perspectives.
Okay, so starting point seems to be, the Financial Times reported they did agree on something, prisoner exchange.
Okay, so that's concrete.
It is. But the same report was pretty clear. No real movement on a ceasefire, a lasting one anyway.
And the reason? Territorial again.
It seems so. The FT said Ukrainian officials reported Russia basically linked any ceasefire talk to Kyiv pulling all its forces out of 4 regions.
Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporizhia, the ones Russia partly controls.
Exactly. So that's a huge demand right off the bat.
A massive hurdle. What about Russia's perspective on the talks themselves?
Interesting point. The Guardian noted Russia seemed satisfied, even though the meeting was really short.
How short?
Less than 2 hours, apparently. The head of their delegation, Medinsky, was quoted saying they were generally satisfied.
But generally satisfied after less than 2 hours. Okay.
And both sides apparently agreed to go away and sort of present their own visions for a ceasefire. Then maybe talks continue.
So setting the stage for future talks, perhaps?
Maybe. But the Telegraph really hammered home Moscow's firm line, same demand. Troops out of those 4 regions first, then maybe a ceasefire.
And how did Ukraine react to that, according to the Telegraph?
Well, they quoted a Ukrainian diplomatic source who basically called the proposals divorced from reality.
Not surprising, given the demand.
No. Which leads us to the Washington Post's angle. They focused a lot on these territorial clashes and, the fact the fighting just carries on.
Did they have any specifics from inside the room?
They did. According to an official briefed on the talks, Medinsky delivered a pretty stark message, something like, someone at this table might lose even more loved ones.
Wow, that's blunt.
Yeah, and also that Russia is ready to wage war as long as it takes.
So the interpretation there is that Russia feels it can just keep going despite sanctions and pressure.
That seems to be the takeaway from the WP report. A belief they can sustain the conflict.
Okay, let's shift slightly. What about the diplomatic game here?
Well, the New York Times had an interesting assessment. They framed the meeting itself as a kind of tactical victory for Russia.
How so? Just because it happened?
Essentially, yes. Because Russia got the talks going without that prior ceasefire on the battlefield that Ukraine and, most Western allies had really been pushing for as a precondition.
Ah, I see. So getting Ukraine to the table on their terms, in a way.
That's the NYT's reading of it. A subtle diplomatic win, regardless of the substance or lack thereof.
Okay. Now, Le Figaro brought in an expert.
Right. Arnaud Dubiam, a Russia specialist. He pointed out a couple of things he saw as significant.
Like what?
Well, first, the fact that Vladimir Medinsky is still leading these talks for Russia. Continuity there. And second, the choice of Istanbul again.
Why is Istanbul significant?
Dubian suggests the Kremlin might see this as picking up where things left off in April 2022, restarting that process. Maybe even a bit symbolic for them, like revenge for the breakdown then, though that's his interpretation.
Interesting. And does he think Russia's goals have changed since 2022?
He suspects not fundamentally. He believes Moscow will likely push for similar things. Ukraine's neutrality, limits on its military, protecting Russian speakers' rights, the Orthodox Church connection to Moscow, those kinds of issues.
So the same core demands, basically.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
And Dubian expects Russia to keep up the pressure militarily while these diplomatic channels are open, weaken the Ukrainian army, gain leverage.
A 2-track approach.
Yep.
Makes sense. What about reactions from elsewhere in Europe? Germany.
Welt reported German Chancellor Friedrich Merz was, quote, extremely disappointed.
Disappointed with?
The lack of progress. He put the blame squarely on Russia, saying they missed a good opportunity for real preliminary peace talks. Just very disappointed it didn't happen.
Okay, so clear disappointment there. Any more optimistic takes?
Well, optimistic might be strong, but Berliner Morgenpost offered a slightly different view. They emphasized the positive aspect was simply that the talks happened at all.
Just the fact of contact being reestablished?
Exactly. The first time since 2022. Their point was, look, without diplomacy, this conflict just grinds on forever.
A fair point.
And they suggested that even small steps, like agreeing on the prisoner exchange, maybe, just maybe, could build some kind of foundation for something bigger later. It's a small glimmer, but it's something.
Right, building blocks, potentially.
So if we pull all these different reports together, what's the picture? Istanbul happened. They discuss ceasefire terms, but Russia's demands on territory are huge.
A major block.
Definitely. Prisoner exchange, agreed, that's a positive. But the overall sense from these Western media accounts is no major breakthrough, deep disagreements remain, especially over land.
Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We're here to make things clear. New episodes every day.